There are stories that never fade, stories whispered through centuries, passed from dusty parchment to candlelit halls, until they become more legend than fact. Among them, one tale rises like a dark star in the night sky, the tale of the Knights Templar, a brotherhood of warriors who vowed poverty but held unimaginable wealth, who swore faith yet were accused of heresy, who fought for God but were feared by kings. And then, almost overnight, they vanished. Or did they? Some say their disappearance was not an end, but a transformation, that beneath the ashes of burned Templars, their bloodline survived, that they married into noble families, intertwined their secrets with the veins of royalty, and carried their legacy into the shadows of history. And so, the whisper began. The Templar Bloodlines, a hidden web of power that might still influence our world in ways unseen. Tonight, we will journey back to the dust and blood of the Crusades, to the echoing stones of Jerusalem, to the fire-lit stakes of France. We will peel back centuries of secrecy and ask, what happened to the Knights Templar? Did they truly disappear, or are their descendants still among us, quietly shaping the course of nations? This is not just history. This is a hunt for a legacy buried under 7 centuries of silence, a legacy that might not want to be found. 40. The birth of the Knights Templar. The late 11th century was an age of both faith and fear, an age when the line between heaven and earth felt thin, when kings ruled with the sword and the church ruled with the soul. Europe was a land of contradictions. Peasants plowed fields under the banners of lords, monks prayed in stone monasteries, and rumors of holy miracles mingled with whispers of demons in the dark. The roads were muddy, the winters harsh, and for most, life was short and brutal. Yet above the hardship, one dream burned bright in the hearts of the faithful, the dream of the Holy Land, Jerusalem. The very name stirred something deep in the Christian imagination. The city where Christ had walked, where he had been crucified, where the tomb of his resurrection stood. To touch that soil was to feel closer to salvation. To kneel in its churches was to stand, if only for a moment, in the presence of eternity. But in the year 1095, that dream had grown desperate. For centuries, the Holy Land had been under Muslim control. Pilgrims still made the dangerous journey, but many never returned. Stories trickled back of travelers robbed, beaten, sold into slavery, their holy quest ending with blood in the sand. And then came the voice that would change history. In a crowded square in Clermont, France, Pope Urban II rose to speak. He was not a tall man, nor a young one, but when he spoke, his words burned like fire. He told of the suffering of Christians in the East, of the desecration of holy sites, of brothers and sisters crying out for help. And then he gave the call, Deus vult, God wills it. The cry echoed across the crowd, then across Europe. Lords raised their banners, knights sharpened their swords, peasants sold what little they owned for a place in the army of God. The First Crusade was born. It was a tide of steel and faith that swept eastward. By 1099, against all expectation, Jerusalem fell to the Crusaders. The city of God was once again in Christian hands, but victory did not bring peace. The Holy Land was a fragile conquest, a patchwork of Crusader states surrounded by a sea of hostility. Pilgrims came in greater numbers than ever, eager to see the sepulchre, to touch the stone where Christ's body had lain. But the roads remained deadly. The desert was not empty. Bandits and raiders haunted the paths, and pilgrims unarmed, untrained, and unprotected bled on the very soil they had come to worship. It was in this chaos, this fragile balance of faith and fear, that a small brotherhood emerged, a brotherhood that would become legend. The year was 1119. 20 years had passed since the First Crusade, and Jerusalem stood under Christian rule, but only just. Amidst the knights, merchants, and monks who filled the city, 9 men came together. 9 knights. They were not kings. They were not princes. They were minor nobles, men of modest means. At their head stood Hugues de Payens, a French knight from the Champagne region. History remembers his name now, but then he was just another soldier of faith. Yet he had a vision. He and his companions saw the suffering of the pilgrims. They saw the blood on the roads, the bodies left in ditches, the terror in the eyes of the faithful as they prayed to survive the journey, and they decided to act. They took a vow. It was no ordinary oath of loyalty to a lord or service to a king. It was deeper. They vowed poverty to give up riches and live simply. They vowed chastity to deny themselves the pleasures of flesh. And they vowed obedience to surrender their wills entirely to their mission and to God. They would live as monks, but they would fight as knights. This was the seed of something the world had never seen before, an order of warrior monks, holy men who carried swords, soldiers who knelt in prayer. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem took notice. He saw their resolve and perhaps saw their usefulness. He granted them quarters on the most sacred ground in the city, the Temple Mount, on the ruins of Solomon's temple. From that day, they were no longer just 9 nameless knights. They became the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. But the world would shorten that mouthful to a name that would strike fear and awe for centuries: the Knights Templar. The symbolism was undeniable. The Temple Mount was no ordinary place. To Jews, it was the site of the first temple, the dwelling place of God's presence. To Christians, it was the ground where Christ had taught and prayed. To Muslims, it was the noble sanctuary. For centuries, legends whispered that the Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest said to hold the very tablets of the 10 Commandments, had once rested there, and now 9 poor knights lived on its ruins. What did they do there? The official story says they guarded pilgrims, and they did. They rode the roads, escorted the faithful, and bled to keep others safe. But rumors began to swirl. Some said the Templars were digging beneath the temple, that by night they searched tunnels and cellars, hunting for something long buried. Did they find it? History is silent, but the whispers are not. Some say they discovered scrolls, ancient writings from the time of Solomon, or perhaps even earlier writings that contained truth so dangerous they could shatter the church's authority. Others say they found relics, the Ark itself, or the menorah of the Second Temple. And there are those who believe they found the holiest relic of all, the Holy Grail. Whether truth or legend, something about those 9 men and that sacred ground set the course of history on a new path. For almost a decade, the Templars remained few, humble, almost invisible. They begged for alms to survive. They wore patched clothes. Their emblem, a red cross on a white mantle, was simple, almost stark. And then, in 1129, everything changed. At the Council of Troyes in France, the Church officially recognized the order. And with that recognition came the blessing of the Pope himself. That papal seal transformed them overnight. No longer were they just a handful of obscure knights. Now, they were a holy order, sanctioned by Rome, answerable only to the Pope. Kings could not command them. Lords could not judge them. The Templars stood outside the normal bounds of power, and with that freedom came something else: wealth. Donations poured in from across Europe. Nobles gave them lands, seeking favor with God. Merchants gave them gold, seeking protection for their trade. Pilgrims gave them gifts in gratitude. But in those first years, before the riches, before the power, before the rumors of heresy and the shadow of the pyres, the Templars were still what they had set out to be: 9 men who made a vow to protect the defenseless, a vow to serve something greater than themselves. They could not have known what their order would become. They could not have foreseen that within 2 centuries, the Templars would rise higher than any order before them, or that the higher they rose, the harder they would fall. But history often begins not with thunder, but with a whisper. And this one began with 9 knights, a vow, and a red cross sewn onto a white cloak. To the hidden empire, wealth, power, and a network across Europe. When the Knights Templar first swore their vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they could not have imagined what the world would place at their feet. They had been 9 poor knights, content to guard pilgrims on dusty roads under the blazing sun of the Holy Land. Yet within a century they would command one of the greatest fortunes in the medieval world, a fortune so vast it stirred envy in kings and fear in the Pope himself. How did men who renounced wealth become the richest order Christendom had ever seen? The answer is not a single event, but a transformation, a gradual, relentless expansion that turned the Templars into something unique. They were not merely warriors. They were not merely monks. They became a state within states, an invisible empire that spanned from Jerusalem to the cold coasts of Scotland, an empire that had no borders, only influence. The flow of gold. The first trickle of wealth came innocently enough. A farmer in France might donate a field for the salvation of his soul. A widow in Spain might leave a cottage in her will, believing that the prayers of these holy knights would speed her husband's journey through purgatory. But these were only drops in a rising tide. When the Pope gave his blessing at the Council of Troyes, the Templars became untouchable. They answered to no king. Their lands could not be taxed. Their men could not be tried in local courts. To harm a Templar was to risk excommunication, the spiritual death sentence of the medieval world. This was revolutionary. For a nobleman, giving land to the Templars was not just charity, it was protection. Your fields would no longer be seized by greedy lords. Your harvest would no longer be taxed into dust. Under the red cross of the temple, your donation became holy ground. And so the gifts came: lands in France, vineyards in Spain, castles in Portugal. By the mid-12th century, Templar properties dotted the map of Europe like stars in the night sky. Consider this. Within just a few generations, the Templars owned thousands of estates across the continent. Farms, mills, entire villages. In England alone, they controlled more than 70 major holdings. In France, they owned whole regions. In Portugal, they became so essential to the defense of the kingdom that kings treated them as equals. Each piece of land fed their coffers. Each farm produced grain, each vineyard wine, each herd wool. The money flowed not for personal luxury, but for the order. Every coin was counted, every grain stored, every horse saddled for a cause that now stretched far beyond protecting pilgrims. A new kind of power. By the early 1200s, the Knights Templar had become more than landowners. They had become something far more surprising: bankers. In an age before banks existed, the Templars invented a system so advanced it feels modern even now. Imagine you are a nobleman in England, bound for pilgrimage to Jerusalem. You cannot carry a chest of gold across bandit-ridden Europe without losing it. So you go to the local Templar preceptory, their local headquarters, and deposit your wealth. The Templars give you a written document, a kind of coded receipt. You travel to the Holy Land, walk into another Templar house, present your paper, and as if by magic they return your money, minus a small fee. It was the birth of international banking. The Templars' network stretched across Europe and into the Middle East, and their trustworthiness was legendary. Kings used them to transfer funds, merchants used them to secure deals, and pilgrims used them to safeguard their lives' savings. By the mid-13th century, the Templars had become the treasury of Europe. They held deposits for nobles and kings. They lent money to monarchs discreetly, efficiently, and always backed by the fearsome weight of their reputation. And it's said that the crown of Aragon, the kings of England, and even the Pope himself turned to the Templars for loans. They financed crusades. They managed estates. In many ways, they functioned as the accountants of Christendom. The first credit card. To modern ears, their system sounds familiar because it is. Some historians call the Templar receipt the world's first traveler's check. It was a simple, brilliant idea. A piece of paper could move wealth safer than any caravan of guards ever could. This innovation made the Templars indispensable. If you were a pilgrim, they were your guardians. If you were a merchant, they were your bankers. If you were a king, they were your creditors. And yet they still wore the white mantle with the red cross. They still swore poverty. No individual Templar could own the riches they handled. Every coin belonged to the order. The great fortresses. With wealth came walls, and the Templars built them high. Across Europe and the Holy Land, they constructed castles that became symbols of their power. These were not mere stone houses. They were fortresses. Designed with precision, armed to the teeth. Take Crac de Chevalier in modern-day Syria. Though built by another order, the Templars held similar strongholds, great castles that dominated trade routes and defied siege after siege. In Spain and Portugal, they built fortresses that would later become the backbone of the Reconquista, the Christian push to reclaim Iberia from Muslim rule. In England, the Temple Church in London became both a place of worship and the heart of their financial network in the kingdom. Even today, its round nave, modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, whispers of their presence. These fortresses were more than military bases. They were nodes in a web that connected the farms of France to the vineyards of Italy, to the gold mines of Cyprus. A pilgrim might travel from Paris to Accra, never spending a coin, never fearing a thief, because at every step, a Templar house awaited, ready to exchange, protect, and defend. An order above all others. By the 13th century, the Knights Templar were no longer just a military order. They were a parallel power structure. They answered only to the Pope. This cannot be overstated. In an age when even kings bowed to the authority of the Church, the Templars were a law unto themselves. If you were a lord, you could not tax their lands. If you were a judge, you could not try their men. If you were a king, you could not conscript their soldiers. The Red Cross gave them immunity. This made them both trusted and feared. Trusted because they were incorruptible, at least in the early years. Feared because they were untouchable. Imagine a Europe where no single nation held the Templars. They held themselves. Their Grand Master sat not as a subject of France or England, but as the head of an international brotherhood. Their network of commanders from Portugal to Palestine obeyed only him and the Pope. This was unprecedented. The Templars had become, in essence, a sovereign entity without borders. The jealousy of kings. But power, even holy power, breeds envy. Kings began to notice the Templars' growing wealth. They noticed the fortresses stronger than their own castles. They noticed the streams of gold flowing into the temple's coffers. And they began to wonder, were these warrior monks still humble servants of God? Or had they become something else? Take King Henry III of England. Historical records show that he repeatedly turned to the Templars for loans. At one point, they effectively ran the English treasury. Royal documents were stored in the Temple in London. The king's gold was guarded by men who owed loyalty not to him, but to a distant Grand Master. Or consider King Alfonso of Aragon. So indebted was he to the Templars that he wrote them into his will, bequeathing large parts of his kingdom to the order. Even in France, where their roots ran deep, kings leaned on the Templars for funds and feared their influence. Because here is the dangerous truth. The Templars owned no throne, but their reach extended into every throne room. The invisible empire. By the late 1200s, the Templar Order was more than an order. It was a machine. Their farms fed their armies, their vineyards filled their chalices, their castles guarded their treasure. They had become the largest landholders in Europe after the Church itself. And through their banking system, they held the purse strings of kings. Imagine Europe as a vast chessboard. France, England, Spain, Portugal, each kingdom a piece on the board. The Templars were not a piece. They were the unseen hand moving the pieces. Their reach was not loud, it was not always visible, but it was everywhere. If a merchant shipped spices from the east, chances are a Templar note backed the deal. If a noble rode to war, a Templar loan bought his armor. If a king dreamed of crusade, Templar gold turned dream into steel. This was their true empire, an empire not of land, but of trust. Trust is harder to measure than gold, but far more powerful. And the Templars held it in vaults, in fortresses, in hearts. Seeds of suspicion. Yet trust is fragile. The very things that made the Templars indispensable also made them vulnerable. Their wealth drew envy. Their independence drew resentment. Their secrecy, for they kept their rituals and rules behind closed doors, drew whispers. What happened inside a Templar commandery at night? They prayed, they trained, they planned. But to outsiders, the lack of access bred imagination. Rumors began to grow, rumors that would one day destroy them. But that is for later. For now, we return to the height of their power, the time when their red cross blazed from the walls of castles across Europe, when their white mantles rode across every battlefield of the Crusades, when their invisible empire seemed unshakable. Examples of their power. To understand the scale of the Templars' reach, we must look at the stories, the moments that show not just their wealth, but their authority. England, 1250s. King Henry III, deeply in debt, deposits the English crown jewels with the Templars in the Temple of London for safekeeping. Imagine it. The very symbols of English monarchy held under the watch of men who did not bow to the king. Spain, early 1200s. The Templars hold castles along the frontier of the Reconquista. They are not just bankers here. They are warriors, their swords defending Christian lands. Kings reward them with more estates, more power. France, mid-13th century. Nobles donate entire villages, convinced that giving to the Templars is giving directly to heaven. Portugal, 12th, 13th centuries. The Templars become so entwined with the kingdom's defense that when the order is later destroyed, their remnants reform as the Order of Christ, an organization that will go on to fund the Age of Exploration, including the voyages of a man named Christopher Columbus. These are not small gestures. They are proof of something deeper, that the Templars had moved beyond the role of knightly guardians. They had become a pillar of medieval civilization. The duality of their image. To a pilgrim, the Templar cross meant safety. To a merchant, it meant credit. To a king, it meant debt. And to those who lived in the shadow of their fortresses, it meant something harder to name, a power both holy and unsettling. Because who could truly understand them? They were knights who swore poverty, yet they held more treasure than anyone else. They were monks who prayed for salvation, yet they killed with cold efficiency. They were loyal to the Pope, yet they were independent of all earthly rulers. This duality made them fascinating. It also made them dangerous. And so, by the late 13th century, the Knights Templar stood at a crossroads. They had built an invisible empire, one of farms and fortresses, gold and trust, faith and fear. But every empire casts a shadow, and the shadow of the Templars would soon grow darker. 3. Black Friday, a bloody fall. The Knights Templar had built an empire without a crown, an empire of gold and stone, faith and fear. For 2 centuries, their red cross had flown above fortresses and battlefields. Their name had carried weight in every throne room, and their coffers had become deeper than kings dared to imagine. But power is a double-edged sword. It inspires awe. It also breeds resentment. And for the Templars, resentment would fester in the shadows until one man decided to wield it like a blade. That man was King Philip IV of France, known to history as Philip the Fair. Philip was not fair in the sense of justice or mercy. He was fair in the sense of cold, statuesque beauty, a king with sharp features and an even sharper ambition. By the dawn of the 14th century, his kingdom was powerful, but his treasury was bleeding. Wars had drained his coffers, and the gold that remained did not belong to him. It belonged to the Templars. The king and the debt. Philip owed the Knights Templar staggering sums. They had bankrolled his wars, guarded his treasures, and managed his finances. The temple in Paris, the Templar headquarters, was, in many ways, the financial heart of his realm. Imagine his humiliation. The King of France, the most powerful monarch in Europe, dependent on warrior monks who answered to no earthly crown. Philip wanted their wealth, but he could not simply take it. The Templars were untouchable. They served only the Pope. Their lands were protected by papal decree. Their brothers could not be tried in ordinary courts. If Philip wanted their treasure, he would have to destroy them. A web of plots. It began quietly. Philip and his advisors spun a web of accusations. They whispered of dark rites, of blasphemy, of secret ceremonies held behind the heavy doors of Templar commanderies. Were the Templars guilty of heresy? Did they worship idols? Did they spit on the cross during their initiations? The rumors were lurid and deliberate, because in the medieval world there was one crime worse than treason: heresy. Heresy was not just a sin, it was a death sentence. If Philip could brand the Templars as heretics, their wealth would no longer be sacred. Their lands could be seized, their brothers could be imprisoned. And so, in the dark corners of Paris, the plot took shape. The night before the storm. The date was set. Friday, October 13th, 1307. In the dead of night, Philip sent secret orders to every bailiff, every sheriff, every royal officer across France. The commands were sealed, to be opened only on the eve of the strike. Inside, one chilling instruction: arrest all Templars, seize their property. Do this in one day, in 1 hour, everywhere. It was a masterpiece of coordination and of treachery, because until that moment, the Templars had no idea the storm was coming. The Black Friday. Dawn broke cold over France on that fateful Friday the 13th. In Paris, the city woke to the sound of boots on cobblestones, the clatter of armor, the dull thud of fists on doors. Templar commanderies, those fortified houses that had stood for decades, were surrounded by soldiers. Knights were dragged from their beds, shackled before they could even understand what crime they were accused of. In the countryside, the same scene unfolded 1,000 times over. Templar farms, castles, and preceptories, once symbols of safety and strength, became cages. By nightfall, hundreds of Templars were in chains. The accusations. The charges were shocking and calculated to turn public opinion. Templars were accused of spitting on the cross during their initiations, of renouncing Christ in secret, of worshipping a mysterious idol, a head called Baphomet. They were accused of unnatural acts, whispers of forbidden rituals, even of sins too vile to name aloud in the medieval mind. It was a smear campaign centuries before the term existed, and it worked. Because what defense could a Templar mount? Their vows of secrecy, meant to protect the sanctity of their rights, now made them vulnerable. If they refused to explain their private rituals, they seemed guilty. If they tried to explain, their words were twisted. The torture. But words were not enough for Philip. He needed confessions. And in the 14th century, confessions were not always found with truth. They were forced with pain. Templars were hauled into dungeons. They were stretched on the rack, their joints torn from their sockets. They were crushed, burned, branded. Some had their feet roasted over fires until flesh peeled from bone. Under such agony, men will say anything. And so, confessions poured forth. Yes, they spat on the cross, but only as a test, some claimed. Yes, they denied Christ, but only in words, never in their hearts. Yes, they worshipped a head, but what head? No one could say. The confessions contradicted each other. They made little sense. But to Philip, they were enough to declare the order guilty, enough to begin the seizure of Templar wealth, enough to convince the world that the Red Cross had been hiding black secrets. The silence of the Pope. There was one man who could have stopped Philip, Pope Clement V. The Templars were his knights. Their authority came from him. Their vows were to him. But Clement was weak, or perhaps frightened. Philip exerted immense pressure on the papacy. He had already clashed with Rome before, even forced the papacy to move its seat to Avignon, effectively under his thumb. And now faced with Philip's accusations, Clement hesitated. Instead of standing firm, he allowed the trials to continue. He ordered investigations. He summoned Templar leaders to answer charges. But in doing so, he gave Philip exactly what he wanted: legitimacy. Because if the Pope himself questioned the Templars, surely there must be something to question. The fall of the Grand Master. At the heart of the order stood one man, Jacques de Molay. He was the Grand Master, the last Grand Master the Templars would ever have. By the time of his arrest, he had led the order for decades. He was a soldier, a diplomat, a man of faith. And now, he was a prisoner. Dragged before inquisitors, he was tortured like the others. Under agony, he confessed. He said the words they wanted, that the order had sinned, that they had betrayed their vows. But later, when the pain subsided, he recanted. He said those words were lies, forced from his lips by torment. This pattern would repeat. Confess, recant, confess again the truth lost in the cracks of broken bodies and broken wills. Friday the 13th. The curse is born. It was not just the mass arrest that gave Friday the 13th its dark reputation. It was what followed. Over the next months, more Templars were seized. In Paris, 54 knights were burned alive. In a single day, their white mantles turned black with ash. In other cities, they faced gallows, stakes, and swords. Templar property was confiscated. Their treasures vanished into royal vaults, or, as some legends insist, into the shadows, hidden by brothers who escaped. The order that had once been the pride of Christendom was now its pariah. And yet, even in their destruction, the Templars sowed the seeds of legend. Because when Jacques de Molay was led to the stake in 1314, he did not go quietly. Bound to the pyre on the Ile de la Cité in Paris, he stood tall as the flames licked his feet. Witnesses say he called out to heaven, summoning Pope Clement and King Philip to stand before God within a year to answer for their sins against the order. It is said the smoke carried his curse. Within months, Clement was dead. Within months, Philip was dead. And so the legend grew that the last Grand Master had cursed the men who destroyed him. The aftermath. By the time the pyres cooled, the Templars were gone. Or were they? Officially, Pope Clement dissolved the order in 1312. Its lands were transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, at least on paper. But not everything could be traced. Treasures were said to have vanished. Ships, docked in the port of La Rochelle, were said to have sailed into the mist, never to be seen again. Did they carry gold, relics, secrets? No one knows. And so, the Templars died, and yet they lived, because their destruction did not erase their name. It burned it into legend. The legacy of blood. The mass arrests of that Friday the 13th marked the end of the Templars as an official order, but they also marked the birth of something else, a legacy of whispers. The whispers that some Templars escaped to Scotland, to Switzerland, to Portugal. The whispers that they buried their treasure or sailed it to distant lands. The whispers that they carried their rights, their symbols, their secrets into other brotherhoods, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, perhaps even the Illuminati. Were those whispers true, or were they the dreams of a world that could not let the Templars go? Whatever the answer, the fact remains, the fall of the Templars was not an ending, it was a transformation. 4. Did they truly vanish, or simply go underground? The pyres of 1314 should have been the end. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, should have burned away the last traces of the order. Their castles should have been emptied, their banners torn down, their names erased from history. But they weren't, because when the smoke cleared, the story of the Templars did not fade. It fractured, scattered into whispers and rumors, legends and conspiracies, and those whispers refused to die. Some say the Templars were wiped out, their wealth stolen, their brothers slaughtered. But others believe a different tale, that the Templars did not vanish at all, that they slipped into shadow, shedding their white mantles and red crosses, taking on new names, new faces, new missions, that they survived, and that survival became one of the greatest mysteries in all of history. The missing treasure. Every legend needs a spark, and for the Templars that spark was the treasure. When King Philip IV of France struck on that Friday the 13th, his soldiers seized Templar properties across the kingdom. They raided commanderies, emptied chests, and filled royal vaults, or so they thought. Because when they stormed the temple in Paris, the very heart of the order's operations, they found something odd. The vaults were empty, no mountains of gold, no relics, no priceless artifacts. Whatever treasure the Templars had, it was gone. Gone before the arrests, gone before Philip's men arrived, gone as if it had simply melted into the air. This absence became the seed of legend, because if the Templars' treasure escaped the king's grasp, where did it go? Some stories speak of wagons rolling out of Paris under cover of darkness, carrying gold and relics to hidden places. Others speak of ships, a fleet of Templar vessels docked at La Rochelle, their sails unfurled the night before the arrests. When the soldiers came, the ships were gone, vanished into the mist, never to be seen again. Did they sail to Scotland, to Portugal, to Switzerland, or further still to lands unknown, across oceans uncharted? No one knows, but the missing treasure is more than gold. It is the absence at the heart of the story, the hollow space where certainty should be. And into that hollow space, the legends rushed. Scotland, the haven in the north. One of the strongest legends says the Templars found refuge in Scotland. At the time of the Purge, Scotland was a land at odds with both France and the Pope. King Robert the Bruce had been excommunicated for his defiance of Rome, but he remained a king who had no reason to hand fugitives to the Pope's inquisitors. The story goes like this. Templars fleeing France sailed north, arriving on the rugged Scottish coast. There, they found a protector in Robert the Bruce. Some claim these surviving Templars fought alongside the Scots at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, the very year of de Molay's execution, when Bruce's vastly outnumbered army defeated the English. Legend tells of mysterious, white-mantled knights who rode into battle that day, turning the tide. Were they Templars? History offers no proof. But the tale lingers, whispered in the winds that sweep over Bannockburn's fields. And in Scotland, the Templars supposedly left another legacy, the Rosslyn Chapel. Built in the 15th century by the Sinclair family, long rumored to have ties to the Templars, Rosslyn's walls are carved with strange symbols, knights, crosses, mysterious plants. Some see it as proof that the Templars' knowledge, and perhaps their bloodline, lived on in Scottish stone. Portugal, a new name, a new face. If Scotland was a refuge, Portugal was a rebirth. When the Pope dissolved the Templars, he ordered their lands transferred to the Knights Hospitaller. In Portugal, something different happened. King Denny of Portugal admired the Templars. He needed their skill, their fortresses, their experience in war. And so he created a new order, the Order of Christ. Officially, the Order of Christ was not the Templars, but unofficially, it was the Templars reborn. Their lands were transferred. Their knights were welcomed. Their mission continued under a new name and a new symbol. This Order of Christ would later sponsor Portugal's Age of Exploration. Their cross, strikingly similar to the Red Cross of the Templars, would fly on the sails of ships that carried men like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus into the unknown. And so the Templars did not simply fade in Portugal, they transformed. Switzerland, the strange new republic. Some theorists point to another possibility, Switzerland. In the early 14th century, around the time of the Templar Purge, Switzerland, a land of mountains and valleys, began to rise as a unique republic. Fiercely independent, surprisingly wealthy, and oddly skilled in both banking and war. Sound familiar? Some believe that surviving Templars brought their expertise and their treasure to Switzerland, planting the seeds of the Swiss banking tradition and the legendary Swiss mercenary culture. Is this true? There is no definitive proof, but the timing and the similarities fuel the speculation. The Freemason connection. Of all the legends, none is more enduring or more controversial than the link between the Templars and the Freemasons. The Freemasons emerged centuries after the Templar Purge, an order of stonemasons who evolved into a secretive fraternity of ritual and symbol. But within their ranks are echoes of the Templars. Similar initiations, shared symbols like the cross and the temple, legends of ancient knowledge passed down through the ages. Some believe that when the Templars were hunted, they went underground, merging with stonemason guilds, hiding their rites within a new craft. Over time, the stonemasons became Freemasons, and the Freemasons became the keepers of Templar secrets. Is this history or myth? No one can say, but walk into a Masonic lodge, and you may see symbols, swords, temples, the all-seeing eye that some claim trace their lineage back to the Red Cross of the Templar. The whispers of bloodlines. Beyond treasure and symbols, there is one legend more haunting than the rest. The legend of the bloodlines. Some say the Templars did more than survive. They intermarried. They wove themselves into the noble houses of Europe. Their descendants carried their names, their secrets, their ambitions, not as knights, but as dukes, counts, and kings. There are whispers that the Templars intermarried with the Merovingians, the ancient Frankish dynasty, and that their blood runs through certain royal lines to this day. This theory, made famous in books like the Da Vinci Code, suggests that the Templars guarded more than relics. They guarded a secret bloodline the descendants of Christ himself, carried from the Holy Land into the veins of Europe's elite. Is it true? Historians scoff, but the idea is irresistible. Because if the Templar bloodline survived, then perhaps the order was never destroyed. Perhaps it simply became invisible, its power no longer worn on a white mantle, but whispered in royal courts. The vanishing and the shadow. When the Pope dissolved the Templars, their name was struck from official rolls. But the story did not end, because the Templars had something more powerful than armies. They had myth, the myth of missing treasure, the myth of vanished ships, the myth of white-cloaked riders appearing at Bannockburn, the myth of bloodlines hidden in noble veins, and myth is harder to kill than men. Examples that fuel the legend. To see how deeply these myths have taken root, Consider the examples that keep them alive. Rosslyn Chapel, Scotland 1446. Built by the Sinclair family, its carvings include Templar knights, strange plants, even what some claim are depictions of New World maize decades before Columbus. Proof the Templars sailed west, or simply romantic projection. Tomar, Portugal, the Convent of Christ, headquarters of the Order of Christ, still bears the Templar cross. Tour its halls and you see the past hiding in plain sight. Freemason rituals. Certain degrees of initiation include symbols, a sword, a temple, a sacred oath that feel like echoes of an older, vanished order. The Legends of Oak Island, Nova Scotia, Canada. Some believe Templar treasure, even the Holy Grail, lies buried there, carried across the ocean centuries before Columbus by ships that disappeared from La Rochelle. Each story may be fantasy, but together they create a tapestry too rich to dismiss. They died, but did they? So, did the Templars truly vanish? The official answer is simple. Yes, the order was dissolved, its leaders burned, its castles seized, but the legends say otherwise. They say the Templars survived in Scotland, in Portugal, in Switzerland, in secret lodges, in royal blood. They say the Red Cross faded from banners, but not from history. They say the Templars learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest power is not to rule openly, but to rule unseen. The enduring mystery. Today, more than 700 years later, the question remains: did the Templars truly vanish? Or did they become something else? Every theory, every rumor is a thread in a larger fabric, one that stretches from the dusty roads of Jerusalem to the cold stone of Rosslyn, from the burning pyres of Paris to the hidden vaults of Freemason lodges. And maybe that's the real secret. The Templars built a legacy that could not be destroyed because it no longer lived in castles or coin, but in stories, symbols, and whispers. 5. The Templar Bloodlines. A hidden legacy of power. When the smoke of the pyres cleared and the last screams of tortured knights faded into silence, the world believed the Templars had vanished. Their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, burned on a cold March night in 1314, defiant to his final breath, cursing those who betrayed him. The French crown declared victory. The Pope washed his hands of the affair. The people whispered that the Red Cross had been extinguished forever. But history has a way of hiding what it cannot destroy. For as one world watched the Templars burn, another world whispered, did they really perish? Or did they simply become invisible? This question, asked in shadows for centuries, leads us into the realm of the Templar Bloodlines. The belief that the Order's legacy, its secrets, and even its very blood still flow through the veins of powerful families today. Escaping the flames. Before we speak of bloodlines, we must ask a simple question. Did any Templars survive the Purge? History tells us that on Friday, October 13th, 1307, the infamous Friday the 13th, King Philip IV of France struck with surgical precision. Across his kingdom, at dawn, soldiers arrested Templars en masse. Hundreds were dragged from their commanderies. Chains replaced swords. Many confessed under torture. Many died under torture. But not all were caught. The French arrests were swift, but they were not universal. The Templars' reach extended far beyond France, into England, Scotland, Portugal, Spain, and across the Mediterranean. In England, King Edward II hesitated. In Scotland, Robert the Bruce defied papal authority altogether. In Portugal, King Denis protected the order under a new name, the Order of Christ, allowing many Templars to quietly slip into a new guise. And so the first layer of the legend formed, that many Templars simply vanished into the fabric of society. Some shaved their beards and became farmers. Some crossed borders and found refuge. Some, as the whispers go, carried away treasure, relics, and more importantly, secrets. The fleet that disappeared. Among the most enduring mysteries is the legend of the Templar fleet. The order possessed ships, not a navy to rival kingdoms, but enough to move goods, pilgrims, and, if needed, gold. When Philip's men struck in 1307, Templar ships were docked in the French port of La Rochelle. When the soldiers arrived, the fleet was gone. Vanished. What happened to those ships? Some say they fled to Portugal. Others claim they sailed to Scotland, finding safe harbor with Robert the Bruce, who had been excommunicated and thus had little reason to obey papal orders. And then there are the wildest whispers that the ships sailed even farther, to distant, unknown shores, that they carried Templars to Ireland, to Iceland, even across the Atlantic, centuries before Columbus. Fact or myth, one thing is clear. Something escaped the fire. And what escaped might have carried not just gold, but blood. The birth of the bloodline legend. When we speak of Templar bloodlines, we speak not of metaphor. We speak of the idea that the Templars' descendants, their literal families, merged into Europe's most powerful dynasties. But wait, weren't the Templars sworn to chastity? They were. Yet we must be honest about human vows. Many Templars took their oaths seriously. But many others were knights before they were Templars. They had families. They had children. Some left their lands and titles to the order when they joined, but their bloodlines did not vanish. And what of those who escaped the purge? Not every surviving Templar lived as a monk in exile. Some abandoned the mantle but kept the sword. Some married. Some merged their lineage into noble houses, quietly, without fanfare. Here, legend begins to weave with history. Scotland, a haven in the north. Scotland occupies a special place in the Templar afterstory. In 1307, when the order was attacked, Scotland was in turmoil. Robert the Bruce had just murdered a rival in a church and was excommunicated by the Pope. This excommunication meant one thing: the Pope's orders carried no weight in Scotland. According to legend, fugitive Templars sailed from France to Scotland, bringing their knowledge and perhaps their treasure with them. Some claim they fought alongside Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, their sudden charge tipping the tide in Scotland's favor against the English. Though mainstream historians debate this fiercely, Scottish lore clings to the image: the Red Cross reappearing on the battlefield, the last charge of the hidden Templars. But more than battle, the Templars allegedly brought something else to Scotland: their rituals and their blood. Scottish noble houses absorbed them, some married into their lines. Some took on their customs. Centuries later, when Freemasonry emerged, many would point to Scotland as its cradle and whisper that the Templar spirit had simply worn a new mass Portugal. The Order of Christ. If Scotland was a refuge, Portugal was a rebirth. King Dené of Portugal admired the Templars. He relied on them to defend his kingdom, and when the purge began, he faced a choice: obey the Pope or protect the knights who had been his shield. He chose the latter. In 1319, he created the Order of Christ, officially a new order, but in practice a lifeboat for the Templars. Many knights shed the name Templar and donned the mantle of this new order, keeping their lands, their traditions, and their influence. And it was this very order, nearly 2 centuries later, that would fund the voyages of Portugal's explorers' voyages that would reshape the world. Think on that for a moment. From the ashes of the Templars came an order that helped launch the Age of Discovery. Some of the ships that sailed under Prince Henry the Navigator bore the Red Cross on their sails, the same cross the Templars had carried into battle. Did the blood of Templars sail with them? If the knights who became the Order of Christ married, had children, passed on their names, then yes. The Sinclair connection. Few names stir Templar whispers like Sinclair. The Sinclair family of Scotland, lords of Rosslyn, have long been entwined with Templar legend. Rosslyn Chapel, built in the 15th century by William Sinclair, is a masterpiece of stone and mystery. Its walls are carved with symbols, crosses, angels, plants native to the New World, carved decades before Columbus set sail. Conspiracy theorists see Rosslyn as proof that the Templars sailed to America. Historians see it as a unique work of devotion and art. But all agree, the Sinclairs had deep ties to the Templars. Some believe fugitive knights found shelter under the Sinclair banner. Some suggest the Sinclairs married into Templar lines. Whether truth or legend, Rosslyn remains a shrine to the idea that the Templar blood did not vanish, it simply flowed into new veins. The Merovingian whisper. From Scotland and Portugal, the whispers grow stranger. Some claim the Templars guarded, or even joined something far older, the Merovingian bloodline. The Merovingians were the first dynasty of Frankish kings, ruling centuries before the Templars, their line stretching back to the 5th century. Legend popularized by books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code claims the Merovingians carried the blood of Christ himself through a supposed union with Mary Magdalene. According to this theory, the Templars were not merely soldiers of Christ. They were guardians of his bloodline. And if that bloodline merged with theirs, if marriages wove Templar descendants into Merovingian descendants, then the Templar bloodlines become something even more explosive, a claim not just to wealth, not just to power, but to sacred kingship itself. Mainstream historians scoff at this. There is no concrete evidence, but legends persist because they feed a hunger. The idea that somewhere, even now, a living person carries the mingled blood of kings and knights, saints and sinners. It is a story too powerful to die. Hidden hands in high places. Step forward in time, through the Renaissance, through the Enlightenment, through the birth of nations. The Red Cross no longer flies over castles. The Templars are gone officially. And yet, whispers continue. That powerful banking families in Italy had Templar ancestors. That noble houses in France still tell stories of ancestors who disappeared during the Purge and returned under new names. That certain American presidents, tracing their genealogy, find lines that stretch back through English and Scottish nobility to names once linked to the Temple. The claim is not that every powerful family descends from Templars. The claim is that enough do. Enough that the Templar blood, whatever that means, still flows through boardrooms and palaces, through parliaments and secret societies. The Freemasonry connection. No discussion of Templar bloodlines is complete without Freemasonry. By the 17th century, Freemasonry had emerged a fraternity of ritual, secrecy, and symbolism, and woven into its myths is the Templar thread. Masonic lodges tell stories of Templar heritage. Their rites echo whispers of knightly vows. Their symbols, the compass, the square, even the unfinished temple, hint at something older. Did the Templars become the Freemasons? Most historians say no, but the idea persists because many early Masonic leaders came from the same noble houses said to have sheltered Templars. Bloodlines, not orders. Families, not organizations. Perhaps the Templars did not become Freemasonry. Perhaps their descendants did. Examples and anecdotes. Consider a few pieces of the puzzle. The Sinclair family, Scotland. The Sinclairs were patrons of early Masonry. They held hereditary titles as Grand Masters of Scottish stonemasons. Their Rosslyn Chapel is still linked to both Templar and Masonic myth. Portugal's Order of Christ. When the Templars became the Order of Christ, they retained their lands, wealth, and members. Prince Henry the Navigator was a member. The Red Cross sailed on ships to Africa and beyond. French noble houses. Some families quietly kept their estates through the purge by simply changing the name on the deed from Templar to cousin, from order to lineage. Modern genealogies. Amateur historians trace the ancestry of figures like George Washington, many European royals, and even American presidents back to medieval noble houses. Some of those houses sheltered Templars. None of these prove the legend, but each adds a thread, and together they weave a tapestry half history, half myth of blood that never stopped flowing. What does Templar bloodline mean? There are two ways to understand the phrase Templar bloodline. The first is literal, the descendants of knights who married, who had children, who passed on their genes. The second is metaphorical, the transmission of ideals, secrets, and symbols through families who inherited not just land, but legacy. Both matter, because when people speak of Templar bloodlines, they rarely mean DNA alone. They mean something deeper. They mean that the spirit of the temple, its power, its secrecy, its ambition, survived the fire, and that those who carry that legacy, in blood or in belief, still walk among us. Why the legend endures? Why does the idea of Templar bloodlines grip the imagination so fiercely? Because it answers a yearning. We look at the ruins of castles, at the faded crosses on ancient stone, and we wonder, did it all just end? The legend says no. The legend says the Templars did not die, they transformed, that they left behind not just stone and gold, but people, flesh and blood, living links to a vanished age. It is a story of survival, a story of secrecy, a story of power that whispers rather than shouts. The modern whisper. Today, in the 21st century, the Knights Templar are everywhere and nowhere. Their name sells novels, their cross decorates coffee mugs, their history is dissected in documentaries. But beneath the noise, the old whisper remains, that somewhere, the true heirs of the temple, not organizations, not clubs, but bloodlines, still hold the keys to what their ancestors found under the Temple Mount, that their hands still move unseen pieces on the chessboard of the world. Is it true? History cannot say. But legends are powerful precisely because they are never fully proven and never fully denied. In the end, the tale of the Templar bloodlines is not just about genealogy. It is about the persistence of an idea, that power can be burned but not erased, that secrets can be buried but not forgotten, and that the blood of 9 poor knights, sworn to protect pilgrims on a dusty road, may still run quietly in veins that shape the destiny of the world. 6. The Templar legacy, influence on the modern age. The pyres that consumed the Knights Templar in the 14th century were meant to turn the order to ash, to erase its memory, to scatter it to the wind. Yet centuries later, their cross still lingers on flags, their symbols still whisper from stone walls, and their innovations still shape the world in ways few pause to notice. The Templars may have vanished from the stage of history as a military order, but their shadow remains long, deep, and strangely alive. This is not just the story of ghosts and conspiracies. It is the story of how a group of warrior monks altered the architecture of power, religion, and finance, and how that architecture still stands today. A cross that never faded. Walk through any European city and look up. In Portugal, you'll see it on the sails of ships carved into old monuments, the Red Cross, the same one the Templars wore into battle. In London, it still crowns the Temple Church, a round building that feels out of time. In countless places, the cross has never left. When the order was dissolved, many Templar properties were handed to the Knights Hospitaller, and later to the Order of Christ in Portugal. But they didn't strip away the cross. Instead, the symbol morphed, adopted by new orders, new kings, new explorers. Consider this. The cross on the sails of Christopher Columbus's ships, the Niña, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, was not a coincidence. It was the cross of the Order of Christ, the successor to the Templars in Portugal. The Templar cross, once carried by knights on horseback, now rode across oceans, heralding the age of exploration. This is the strange truth of symbols. They survive their makers. Even now, the Templar cross appears in unexpected places on military insignia, in civic coats of arms, in the logos of banks and charities. A red cross on white cloth, centuries pass, but the image persists. The invention of modern banking. The Templars were warriors, yes, but they were also architects of an invisible system that changed the world. They invented international banking before the term existed. We spoke before of the pilgrim who could deposit gold in London and withdraw it in Jerusalem using a coded receipt. That system was revolutionary. But what is less often said is this: their system didn't die with them. The idea of paper credit of wealth that could move without physically moving survived the Templars' fall and evolved into what we now call banking. The receipts they gave pilgrims became the conceptual ancestors of modern checks, bank drafts, even credit cards. Today, when you swipe a card or send money across borders in seconds, you are in a strange way walking in the footsteps of the Templars. And what of Switzerland? Some theorists insist the Templars' methods influenced Swiss banking culture. True or not, there's an undeniable resonance. An independent, trusted financial system born in a land of fortresses and neutrality. Every time someone whispers about a Swiss vault, they are, knowingly or not, speaking of a tradition the Templars helped inspire, a trust in hidden safes and silent ledgers that began 7 centuries ago. The Freemasons and the secret societies. By the 18th century, another brotherhood had emerged, one that many would link, fairly or unfairly, to the Templars, the Freemasons. The Freemasons began as guilds of stonemasons, keepers of sacred architectural knowledge. But over time, they evolved into a symbolic fraternity, layered with ritual, hierarchy, and secrecy. And within their lodges, many saw echoes of the Templars. Masonic rites that reference Solomon's temple, symbols of swords, compasses, and sacred oaths, degrees of initiation that mirror, in faint outline, the whispers of old Templar vows. Is the connection real, or simply romantic invention? Some historians argue there is no direct link, that Freemasons borrowed Templar myths centuries later to cloak their own traditions in mystery. But others see a line, faint but unbroken, between the knights who vanished in 1314 and the lodges that rose in the centuries that followed. And beyond Freemasons, there are whispers of Templar influence in other secretive orders, the Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, even modern fraternal groups. Every time a conspiracy theory mentions shadowy cabals shaping the world, the Templar name is never far behind. They became, in death, the archetype of the secret society. The mythic knight. The Templars are gone, but the idea of them is everywhere. In films, novels, and games, the Templars stride across time. They are guardians of holy relics. They are puppet masters behind thrones. They are heroes. They are villains. From Indiana Jones to Assassin's Creed, from the Da Vinci Code to obscure medieval romances, the Templar is no longer just a historical figure. It is a mythic role. And myths matter. When people imagine a holy knight, they picture the white mantle and red cross. When they think of a hidden order, they hear the name Templar. This mythic image has power to sell stories, to inspire faith, even to justify movements. The influence on religion and ritual. The Templars were not theologians. They were men of action, sworn to a sacred cause, yet their blend of monastic devotion and military discipline created a template for later religious orders and even for modern concepts of holy warriors. Their vows, their codes, Their strict hierarchy became models, consciously or unconsciously, for later groups, some benign, some darker. Even modern knighthood orders, like the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, owe part of their ceremonial structure to the Templar mold. The Templars' ritual life also became the soil for legend. Their secrecy meant simply to protect the dignity of their rites fed centuries of speculation about hidden ceremonies, forbidden knowledge, occult practices. Whether true or imagined, those whispers inspired everything from the ritual trappings of Freemasonry to the initiations of modern fraternal orders. Architecture and stone legacy. The Templars built fortresses, but they built more than that. They built an architectural language. Look at the round churches they left behind, modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. These circular sanctuaries, from the Temple Church in London to the Church of the Templars in Tomar, Portugal, became enduring symbols, their shapes still standing centuries later. Even today, these churches draw pilgrims and tourists alike, their geometry whispering of Jerusalem, of crusade, of a time when faith and steel were bound together. And there are subtler marks: Templar crosses carved into village walls, Templar seals etched on ancient stones, forgotten preceptories that now house schools, libraries, even homes. The order is gone, but its stone speaks. The enduring legends of treasure. No part of the Templar story captures the imagination like their treasure. We spoke before of the wagons leaving Paris, the ships sailing from La Rochelle. But what matters now is not where the treasure went, it's the legend of it. That legend has seeded centuries of hunts. The Oak Island mystery in Nova Scotia, where some believe Templar gold or even the Holy Grail lies buried beneath booby-trapped tunnels. The idea that secret caches of Templar wealth are hidden under churches, in caves, beneath farms across Europe. The theory that the lost treasure isn't gold at all, but knowledge scrolls, relics, secrets that could shake the foundations of faith. Every few years, a new book, documentary, or dig reignites the hunt. The Templar treasure has become the treasure, the ultimate lost hoard in Western imagination. Examples of modern Templar presence. Consider a few striking threads that tie the Templars to the present. Portugal's Order of Christ. After the Templars' dissolution, this new order took up their lands and mission. Its cross still adorns monuments, and it was this cross red on white that flew on the sails of ships like Vasco da Gama's as they mapped the world. Temple Church in London. Once the Templar headquarters in England, it still stands today, tucked between modern offices. Inside, effigies of knights lie carved in stone, as if only sleeping. The Vatican archives. Within their walls are papal documents absolving the Templars of some charges discovered centuries later, reshaping how we view their trials. Modern Templar orders. Around the world, various groups claim spiritual descent from the original Templars, some ceremonial, some charitable, some simply romantic recreations of the past. Freemason lodges. Though the link is debated, many Masonic rites reference the Temple and the Templars, and some Masonic orders bear the name Knights Templar outright, adopting their imagery and ideals. The culture of secrecy. The Templars' greatest unintended legacy might be this: they became the blueprint for the secret order. Before the Templars, there were monastic orders, guilds, and fraternities. But the Templars fused the idea of holy mission, military power, and secrecy into something the world had never seen. That fusion created an archetype. Every secret society born in their shadow, real or imagined, borrows their silhouette. The black-robed Illuminati in fiction, the mysterious cabals in conspiracy theories, the shadowy councils in movies all carry a bit of the Templar ghost. The Templars did not just leave history. They left a shape in history, an outline that others stepped into. Their legacy in language and culture. Even our language carries their imprint. The phrase, Friday the 13th, so often whispered as a day of bad luck, has roots in the dawn raid that began their downfall. When people avoid the number 13, they are knowingly or not echoing the memory of the morning when soldiers broke through Templar doors. Popular culture has made the Templar myth universal. From Hollywood to video games, they are everywhere as protectors, as villains, as the keepers of lost truths. They have become a canvas. Writers paint them as guardians of the Grail, as founders of shadow governments, as the hands behind history's curtain. And audiences believe because the Templars were real, and because what is real and what is imagined has long since blurred. The essence of their legacy. Strip away the conspiracy theories, the romantic retellings, the treasure maps, and you are left with this. The Knights Templar created systems that outlived them. A system of finance that became modern banking. A system of logistics that inspired later military and trade networks. A system of ritual and hierarchy that seeded centuries of fraternal orders. They also created a myth. And sometimes, myth is the most powerful legacy of all. Because the Templars did not need to survive in flesh to survive in influence. Their story has been told and retold so many times that they are no longer just knights. They are a symbol. The Red Cross, in the modern mind. Look again at that red cross. It began as a mark on a mantle, a sign of vows taken. It became a banner carried into war. It became the emblem on ships that crossed oceans. And now it adorns coats of arms. It appears in the insignia of charities, even in the logo of the International Red Cross, founded centuries later as a humanitarian effort. Though not directly linked, the choice of a red cross on white carries a resonance, a subconscious echo of knights who swore to protect the weak. The Templars are long gone, but their cross and the idea behind it remains. The shadow and the light. The Templars' legacy is not purely noble. Their name has been invoked by extremists and cultists, by groups claiming divine authority or ancient secrets. But it has also been invoked by dreamers, by those seeking a code of honor in a cynical age, by charities that call themselves Templar in spirit. This dual legacy, light and shadow, is fitting, because the Templars themselves were a contradiction. They were monks who fought, they were knights who prayed. They swore poverty yet handled riches. They rose in the name of faith, and they fell under the weight of fear. And that contradiction is why we still speak of them. A legacy that refuses to die. 7 centuries have passed since the Templars were dragged from their beds and burned at the stake. Empires have risen and fallen. Kings have been crowned and buried. But the Templars remain. Not as an army, not as a state, but as an idea. An idea that inspired explorers to cross oceans, bankers to invent systems, storytellers to weave epics, and seekers to search for meaning in a world of shadows. Because the Templars were never just men. They were and are a myth we cannot stop telling. 7. Conspiracy or truth? Are they still pulling strings today? The flames of Paris should have consumed them. The papal decrees should have erased them. The swords of kings should have ended them. And yet 7 centuries later, the name Templar still lingers, like a phantom that refuses to fade. Whisper it in the right corners, and you'll see eyes widen. Some will speak of bloodlines, others of hidden vaults, or ancient knowledge buried beneath cathedrals. And then there are the boldest whispers of all the ones that claim the Templars never truly fell, because they are still here, quietly steering the world. Are these only myths? Are they fantasies spun by novelists and dreamers? Or do they conceal fragments of truth? The DNA of a secret empire. When the Templars were dissolved, their structures were torn down, at least on paper. But their architecture of power, their methods, their networks, their symbols, could not be burned so easily. They had mastered the art of operating above kings and beyond borders. They had learned how to move gold without moving it, how to enforce silence, how to demand obedience that no monarch could command. And here is the question that haunts every historian who studies them. Can an organization like that ever truly die? Or does it simply shed its skin, take on a new name, and keep moving in the shadows? Theories that won't die. For centuries, the Templars have been the subject of the most enduring conspiracy theories on Earth. Some claim they merged into other orders, the Hospitallers, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and that their rituals and secrets live on in these groups. Others, they became the architects of banking dynasties, the invisible forefathers of modern finance, shaping the systems of wealth and debt that now rule nations. And the most audacious theories claim they seeded the roots of what we now call the New World Order, a shadowy elite guiding global events hidden in plain sight. Are these wild fantasies, or are they echoes of something real? Threads of power. Look closely, and you find threads slender but tantalizing. Freemasons. Many Masonic orders bear degrees called Knights Templar. Some lodges display swords, crosses, and rituals that seem like distorted reflections of Templar vows. Is this homage or inheritance? Portugal's Order of Christ. We know this is real. The Templars' lands in Portugal simply became the Order of Christ. Their red cross sailed with explorers, opening the maps of the modern world. That's not myth, that's history. The banking world. The Templars invented systems that resemble modern banking. Is it truly so unthinkable that families who worked with them, who inherited their lands, carried forward their financial methods into the centuries ahead? Royal bloodlines. Some claim the Templars intermarried with noble families, their descendants merging into the fabric of European aristocracy. If true, the Red Cross might not fly, but it might still flow through veins. Are the Templars the Freemasons? One of the most persistent claims is that the Templars became the Freemasons. The theory goes like this. When the Templars were hunted, many fled. Some hid in Scotland, where Masonic guilds of stonemasons already existed. There, they allegedly disguised themselves as Masons, folding their rites into the guild's traditions. Over time, those guilds evolved into the symbolic Freemasonry we know today. But at their core, the theory says, the Templar soul remained. The evidence. Masonic rituals reference Solomon's Temple, the same site the Templars once occupied. The Knights Templar degree exists within Masonic structures. Symbols of swords, compasses, and sacred geometry echo Templar lore. Historians argue about this endlessly. Some say the connection is fantasy, that the Masons simply borrowed the Templar mystique centuries later to cloak themselves in mystery. But for those who believe, this is not just borrowing, it's continuation. The Illuminati and the New World Order. Go deeper into the rabbit hole, and the theories grow darker. Some claim the Templar's survival led not just to Freemasonry, but to something far more secretive. The Illuminati, the ultimate hidden hand guiding world events. According to this theory, the Templars' descendants did not just survive, they thrived. They learned the lesson of their own destruction. Never again rule openly, never again wear the red cross on the battlefield. Instead, they became invisible. They traded swords for influence, castles for boardrooms, banners for backroom deals. The theory claims they now exist as a global elite, bankers, politicians, royals shaping wars, economies, even ideologies, all behind a curtain of secrecy. Is this paranoid fantasy? Or is it the natural suspicion that arises when an organization of such reach and mystery disappears without leaving a body? The missing pieces that feed the flame. Why do these theories endure? Because there are holes in the historical record, holes just wide enough for imagination to slip through. The missing treasure, the vanished ships from La Rochelle, the documents that disappeared or were destroyed. The fact that, even as their leaders burned, many lower-ranking Templars simply melted away, never captured, never accounted for. Where did they go? What did they take with them? Silence leaves space, and into that silence, centuries of speculation have poured. The modern world and the Templar shadow. Some say the Templars' influence is visible if you know where to look. Look at the architecture of power, the banks of Europe, the court rituals of monarchies, the iconography of secretive orders. Look at the rituals of Freemasonry, the swords, the crosses, the temples. Look at the language of conspiracy theories, the obsession with hidden hands, shadow governments, elites who move the world. Time and again, the figure of the Templar appears a ghost in the corner of the frame. Examples that keep the legend alive. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, carved with symbols some believe hide secrets of the Templars' survival, including alleged depictions of plants from the New World, as if the Templars assailed there long before Columbus. Freemason lodges some degrees explicitly call members Knights Templar, complete with ceremonies, swords, and oaths, as if the order never died, only changed its name. The Vatican's secret archives in 2001, historians discovered a 1308 document, the Chinon Parchment, revealing that Pope Clement V had quietly absolved the Templars of heresy. Why was this hidden for centuries? What else might still be sealed away? Modern Templar. Orders from Europe to the Americas. Various groups claim to be heirs to the Templar tradition. Some ceremonial, others charitable, others whispering of old connections. The argument for survival. Those who believe in the Templars' survival often point to a simple fact. The order was vast, tens of thousands of members, hundreds of commanderies, a network that spanned continents. Could every Templar truly have been captured, killed, or absorbed? Or did some, perhaps many, slip away? In an age without surveillance, without records, it would not be hard for a knight to shed his mantle, to become a pilgrim, a merchant, a farmer. If they did, they would take with them the most dangerous thing of all, knowledge. The argument for death. Skeptics counter. The Templars did not survive. They were crushed, their leadership executed, their structure shattered. What survives, skeptics say, are not the Templars, but their myth. The Freemasons, the Illuminati, the New World Order. These are stories, not successions. The real Templars, they insist, ended in 1314. What lives on is an idea, not an organization. The truth, or something between t. Perhaps the truth is more complicated. Perhaps the Templars did scatter, some absorbed into other orders, some into obscurity. Perhaps they left fragment symbols, ideas, rituals that later groups picked up, reshaped, and wove into their own myths. Perhaps the Templars did not survive as a single secret society, but their DNA survived, threading through centuries, quietly shaping things in ways even they could never have imagined. Why, we keep asking. Why does the question, are they still pulling strings, fascinate us so much? Because the Templars are the perfect canvas for our fears and hopes. They were holy, so we imagine them as guardians of hidden truths. They were powerful, so we imagine them as masters of hidden power. They were destroyed unjustly, so we imagine they must have secretly survived. We live in a world where power often feels invisible. Corporations, governments, banks, they shape our lives, but we rarely see the hands that move them. The Templars are a story we tell ourselves to make sense of that feeling, the idea that there is always someone behind the curtain. The final question. Are the Templars still pulling strings today? If by Templars we mean the same order that rode into battle under a red cross, the answer is no. That order was broken on a Friday the 13th, its masters burned, its castles seized. But if by Templars we mean the ideas they carried, their methods of secrecy, their systems of finance, their myth of sacred mission, then perhaps the answer is different, because those things did survive. They survived in the banks we use. They survived in the symbols we see. They survived in the myths we still tell. And maybe, just maybe, they survived in blood. 700 years ago, flames rose over Paris. The world watched as Jacques Stoul de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, stood bound to the stake, the red cross on his mantle blackened by smoke. As the fire devoured him, he spoke words that still echo across centuries, words of defiance, of a curse, of a truth too powerful to burn. That should have been the end. The banners torn down, the castles emptied, the order dissolved. But history has a strange way of refusing to end neatly. Because the Templars did not simply disappear. They became something greater and more elusive. They became legend. From the dusty roads of Jerusalem to the secret vaults of Paris. From the mysterious ships said to have sailed away from La Rochelle to the stone walls of Rosslyn Chapel. From the red cross on the mantles of knights to the same cross flying centuries later on the sails of ships that would map the world, the Templar story has never stopped moving. They were warriors, yet they built the foundations of banking. They swore poverty, yet they held the wealth of kings. They were accused of heresy, yet they became symbols of faith. They were destroyed in one of history's most calculated purges, and yet they survived, if not in flesh, then in shadow. We have followed their journey through fire and blood, through whispers and wonders. We have asked the question that haunts their name. Did they truly vanish, or did they slip underground, their influence hidden in plain sight? Are they gone, or are they still here, their legacy alive in secret lodges, in royal bloodlines, in the invisible architecture of power? The truth, perhaps no one will ever know. Perhaps that is the greatest secret of all. But one thing is certain. The Knights Templar left behind something indestructible. They left an idea. The idea that a small band of men can change the world. The idea that symbols can outlive empires. The idea that even in death, a story can live forever. Look around you. In the crosses etched on ancient stone, in the vaults of banks, in the whispers of secret societies, in the myths of hidden treasure and sacred bloodlines. The Templars are still here, not as knights on horseback, but as an enduring mystery that refuses to let go of our imagination. 7 centuries have passed since the flames, but the question lingers in the smoke. Did the Templars ever truly fall, or have they been with us all along?